Welcome to your deep dive all about Chinese cabbage. You've given us quite a collection this time, articles, research papers, even some pieces about the history of this veggie. Our goal today is to make you the ultimate Chinese cabbage expert. So are you ready to unlock some secrets?
Absolutely. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so first, can we talk about all the different names? I mean, Chinese cabbage, Napa cabbage, celery cabbage. It's like something out of a spy novel.
Right. It can get a little confusing, but all those names refer to the same thing, the Brassica rapa subspecies pekinensis. But, and here's a little surprise, it's actually more closely related to turnips and bok choy.
Wait, really? So it's not like a close relative of kale and cauliflower? Huh.
Yeah, a lot of people think that, but nope. It's thought to be a cross between turnips and bok choy, which actually explains why it has a milder flavor than, say, green cabbage.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm at the store, how do I pick out a Chinese cabbage? Make sure I get the right one.
Well, you want to look for an oblong shape, kind of with a rounded head. No pointy ends. The leaves should be light green, maybe yellowish, and a little curled and twisted.
Okay, got it. So nothing pointy, just kind of like chill and wavy. So you mentioned the flavor is mild. Does that mean it's not as versatile in the kitchen?
Not at all. Actually, that mild flavor is what makes it so adaptable. You can enjoy it raw, you can cook it, you can even ferment it. And bonus, there's no tough stalk to deal with. It's all tender leaves.
Oh, I like the sound of that. Tender leaves and lots of options. So that means it works in both European and Asian cuisines.
Exactly. It blends right in. Speaking of Asian cuisine, have you ever tried kimchi?
Kimchi, oh yes. Fermented Chinese cabbage. Spicy, tangy, delicious.
There's a great recipe in one of the sources you provided, by the way.
Awesome, I'll have to check that out. Okay, so you mentioned different ways to prepare it. Let's talk cooking methods.
Sure. Let's start with raw preparations. Eating it raw is going to give you the most nutritional benefits, because cooking can sometimes degrade some of those vitamins and minerals.
That's a good point. So what are some good ways to enjoy Chinese cabbage raw?
Well, slicing it thinly is key. And then just a simple dressing with vinegar and oil. Maybe add some cucumber, some orange slices, toasted walnuts, even tofu if you like, for a little extra flavor and texture.
That sounds so refreshing. I can practically taste it. But what if I'm in the mood for something warm, like cooked Chinese cabbage?
Well, then the key is to keep the cooking time short. That way you preserve those nutrients and keep that nice crisp texture.
Right, we don't want mushy cabbage. So what are we talking about here? Boiling, steaming, stir-frying.
All good options. If you're adding it to soup, a quick boil for like 2 minutes is perfect. Steaming takes a bit longer, maybe 5 to 8 minutes, and that gives you a nice tender texture. And for stir fries, 3 to 5 minutes max. Just enough to get it cooked through, but still crunchy.
Okay, I'm taking notes. Quick cooking is key. Now, what about flavor pairings? What goes well with cooked Chinese cabbage?
Oh, it's really versatile. You can pair it with noodles, rice, tofu, other vegetables, mushrooms, you name it. For a little extra flavor, soy sauce is always good, and maybe some sesame seeds or cashew nuts on top.
I can almost smell it now. That savory soy sauce and nutty sesame. So I remember reading something about Chinese cabbage and bloating. Is that something to worry about?
Yeah, some people find that it can cause bloating because of the fiber and sulfur content, but you can use certain spices to kind of counteract that. Caraway, fennel, and ginger are particularly good for that.
Speaking of ginger, didn't you say there's a ginger-based recipe in those sources?
Yes, you should definitely give it a try.
Okay, will do. Now, how about storage? How long does Chinese cabbage stay fresh in the fridge?
Luckily, it's pretty low maintenance. It can last for a week in the fridge, no problem. And even longer, like several weeks if you wrap it in a damp towel. The main thing is don't leave it out at room temperature for too long.
Out of curiosity, why not room temperature? What happens then?
Well, there have been studies, and it turns out that those great cancer-fighting compounds we talked about earlier, glucosinolates, they actually start to break down at room temperature. So keeping it in the fridge helps preserve those compounds.
That's good to know. So cold and damp is the way to go. What if I have too much, though? Can you freeze Chinese cabbage?
You can. Just keep in mind that freezing changes the texture a little, so it's best for dishes where you'll be cooking it anyway. If you want to freeze it, just wash it, slice it up, and you can freeze it raw, blanched, or even after you've stir-fried it. Oh, and make sure to use an airtight container so it doesn't get freezer burn.
Okay, makes sense. Fridge for raw, freezer for cooked. Now, I have to ask about those tiny black spots you sometimes see on Chinese cabbage. They look a bit like mold, so I always wonder, are they safe?
Those spots can be a little alarming, but they're actually harmless. It's just a sign of cell death and drying. It's called leaf margin necrosis, and it can happen after harvest, from being stored in the fridge or even just from being in a warm environment.
Okay, so not mold. That's good to know.
Yeah.
But how can I tell the difference between those spots and actual rot?
Well, rot will look brown and mushy, and it'll usually have a bad smell. The black spots, on the other hand, are just cosmetic. They don't affect the flavor or the safety of the cabbage.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a bit of a history buff, so I have to ask, where does Chinese cabbage come from? The name kind of gives it away, but
Yeah, as you might guess, it originated in China, and it's been around for a long time, since about the 5th century. It's been a staple ingredient in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean cuisine for centuries.
wow, that's amazing. So its popularity in the West is a more recent thing.
Exactly. It's really gained popularity alongside the growing love for Asian cuisine around the world.
That makes sense. So let's talk nutrition. What makes Chinese cabbage so good for you?
Well, for one thing, it's packed with nutrients, but very low in calories and fat, like incredibly low. We're talking 16 calories and only 0.3% fat per 100 grams.
Wow, that's impressive. What about vitamins and minerals?
Well, 100 grams can actually cover your entire daily need for vitamin K. It's also a great source of vitamin C, beta-carotene, folic acid, potassium, calcium, iron, even some essential amino acids. And if you want to see the full breakdown, there's a complete nutritional table in the source material.
Okay, so lots of vitamins and minerals, very low in calories. That's already a great start. But what about specific health benefits? I know we mentioned some research on Chinese cabbage and cancer earlier.
Right. Well, one of the biggest benefits is that it's linked to a lower risk of cancer. Studies have shown that people who regularly eat Chinese cabbage have a lower risk of developing several types of cancer. And we're talking colon cancer, lung cancer, stomach cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, and even prostate cancer.
Wait, so eating cabbage could help prevent cancer? That's incredible.
It really is. And even just eating cruciferous vegetables like Chinese cabbage once a week has been linked to a reduced risk of colon cancer. This is largely because of those compounds we talked about earlier, glucosinolates.
Right, the glucosinolates.
Yep, those are found in all cruciferous veggies, but Chinese cabbage is a particularly good source.
So eating Chinese cabbage regularly could actually reduce my risk of cancer. That's definitely something to think about. Are there any other health benefits we should know about?
Oh, definitely. There are lots. Let's break down some of those amazing benefits in more detail. All right, so first up, we have the incredible power of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents. Chinese cabbage is full of these beneficial compounds, and they play a huge role in preventing chronic diseases like heart disease. You can think of them like little warriors fighting off all the damage caused by free radicals and inflammation.
So it's not just about the vitamins and minerals, but these other powerful compounds that are working to keep us healthy too.
Exactly. And those outer green leaves, those are especially rich in antioxidants called polyphenols, especially synaptic acid. So don't throw those leaves away. They're nutritional gold mines.
Okay, noted. No more discarding those outer leaves. So I've got cancer protection and antioxidants.
Yeah.
What else can Chinese cabbage do for us?
Well, all that vitamin C we talked about, that combined with other nutrients, polyphenols, and even mustard oils makes Chinese cabbage a fantastic immune system booster.
Mustard oils. Those sound interesting.
They are. They're also known as isothiocyanates, and they're formed when the glucosinolates break down in the cabbage. They're thought to have powerful anti-cancer properties and might even help boost the immune system.
So we've got antioxidants, anti-inflammatory agents, immune boosters, and cancer-fighting mustard oils. Is there anything this cabbage can't do?
Well, it probably can't do your taxes, but in terms of health benefits, it's pretty impressive. Oh, and there's one more thing. Chinese cabbage is a fantastic source of vitamin K, which is essential for bone health. It helps with bone and cartilage growth, blood clotting, and it can even help prevent osteoporosis.
Osteoporosis is a big concern, especially as we get older. So how does vitamin K actually work to keep our bones strong?
It all comes down to a protein called osteocalcin. Our bones need vitamin K to produce this protein, and osteocalcin helps bind calcium, which is the building block of bones. So without enough vitamin K, our bodies can't use calcium effectively, and that can lead to weak and brittle bones.
Wow, so eating a salad with Chinese cabbage could actually be helping my bones.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Now, what about availability? Can we find Chinese cabbage year-round, or is it seasonal?
You're in luck. Although it does have a natural growing season, you can usually find it year-round at most grocery stores because it's often grown in greenhouses or under fleece.
That's great news. Okay, so let's say I'm at the store looking for the perfect Chinese cabbage. Any buying tips you can share?
Sure. First, always look for freshness. Farmers markets are a great place to find really fresh produce. And if you can, choose organic and heirloom varieties. They often have higher nutrient content and more interesting flavors than conventionally grown varieties.
Okay, organic, heirloom, and fresh from the farmer's market. Got it. Now, what if I want to try growing my own? Is that even possible with Chinese cabbage?
Absolutely. Growing your own veggies is such a rewarding experience, and Chinese cabbage is actually pretty easy to grow. All you need is a spot that gets some sun, or even partial shade is fine, and soil that drains well. And it's good to add some compost to enrich the soil. There's more detailed info in your sources, but it's really not as complicated as you might think.
You're making me want to start a garden.
Yeah.
And speaking of variety, are there different types of Chinese cabbage to choose from?
There are. The two main varieties that originated in China are bok choy, which means white vegetable, and longnan pak, which translates to tooth of the white dragon. The types you see in Europe are actually derived from longnan kak, and there are lots of different cultivars within that, like Autumn Fun F1, for example, is known for being resistant to clubroot.
So there's a whole world of Chinese cabbage varieties out there. Are there any others you'd recommend?
Green Rocket F1, Osiris F1, and Parkin F1 are all good choices, and they're less prone to pests. And for flavor and nutrient density, Granat is a fantastic option.
Granat, okay. I'll have to look out for that one. So let's say I've either successfully grown my own Chinese cabbage or I've found some beautiful ones at the market. How do I know when to harvest them?
Well, it depends on when you sowed the seeds and what variety you're growing, but generally speaking, harvest time falls somewhere between September and November. And Chinese cabbage can handle a little frost, so if the temperature drops, you can protect your plants with some fleece, cardboard boxes, or even just some fir branches.
Good to know. Now, I've heard some things about Chinese cabbage and digestion problems. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's true that some people do experience bloating or gas after eating Chinese cabbage because of the fiber and sulfur. But it's usually easier to digest than other types of cabbage, and a lot of people, even those with sensitive stomachs, can tolerate it just fine.
Okay, that's good to hear. Are there any ways to minimize those digestive issues?
Yeah, freezing or cooking the cabbage can make it easier to digest. Chopping it into smaller pieces can help too, and removing the stalk. And if you combine it with some healthy fats, that can also help.
Great tips. What about people with histamine intolerance or fructose intolerance? Can they eat Chinese cabbage?
Well, the good news for people with histamine intolerance is that Chinese cabbage is completely histamine-free. And for those with fructose intolerance, it's generally safe too because it has a fairly low fructose content, especially if you eat it in moderation.
That's fantastic. Okay, one last question before we wrap up this segment. What about our furry friends? Can they enjoy Chinese cabbage too?
They sure can. It's actually a really healthy treat for pets, but as with any new food, you should introduce it gradually. You can give it to them raw or cooked, and it's generally less likely to cause bloating than other types of cabbage. Just start with small amounts and see how they do.
That's good to know. Well, folks, that concludes part 1 of our Chinese cabbage adventure. We'll be back soon with more fascinating insights in part 2. Stay tuned.
And we're back with our Chinese cabbage deep dive. I can't believe even our pets can enjoy this veggie. You know, it's pretty amazing how much we've learned about just one vegetable.
Right. It really shows you how much there is to discover about the natural world, and
Yeah.
Chinese cabbage is a perfect example, I think, of how something's so basic can be so incredibly good for us.
Speaking of which, we were talking earlier about how Chinese cabbage might be good for gastritis and IBS. Do you know how that works? Well, basically, Chinese cabbage is considered what they call a light whole food. It's very easy to digest for most people, and it doesn't usually cause bloating, nausea, or gas. So for people who have gastritis or IBS, it can be a really soothing and nutritious food to add to their diet.
That is fascinating. It's amazing how this one vegetable can have so many benefits. Now, I was thinking back to those black spots we talked about, the ones that aren't actually mold. Is there any way to, prevent them from forming in the first place?
Well, you can't completely stop them from ever happening, but storing your cabbage properly can definitely help. Remember, the key is to keep it cool and damp. So wrap it in a damp towel and keep it in the crisper drawer of your fridge. That'll help maintain the right humidity and keep it from drying out, which is what causes those spots to form.
Right. Cool and damp. Happy cabbage. So are there any, downsides to eating Chinese cabbage? Anything we should be aware of?
Well, like with anything, moderation is important. Eating too much of anything can cause problems, and with Chinese cabbage, it could potentially lead to some digestive issues, especially if you're prone to bloating or gas. Oh, and if you're taking blood thinners, you should talk to your doctor before eating a lot of vitamin K-rich foods like Chinese cabbage, because vitamin K can interfere with those medications.
That's a really good point. Moderation is key. But it sounds like the benefits definitely outweigh the risks overall. So I'm a bit of a history nerd, and I find it so cool that this vegetable has been around for centuries. Can you tell me more about its journey through time?
Oh, sure. Well, like we said, it originated in China way back in the 5th century, and then it spread to other countries nearby, like Japan and Korea. And here's a fun fact. During the Song dynasty in China, Chinese cabbage was actually used as currency. Imagine paying your taxes with bundles of cabbage.
That's amazing. From ancient currency to modern superfood. So you were saying that those cancer-fighting compounds, the glucosinolates, are more concentrated in the outer leaves. So should we be eating those leaves specifically?
Well, the glucosinolates are present throughout the whole cabbage, but yeah, research shows that the outer leaves have a higher concentration, so don't throw them away. They're really good for you.
So if I made a salad with mostly outer leaves, it would be like a superpowered salad.
You could say that, and the best way to get the most out of those compounds is to eat the cabbage raw or cook it very lightly.
Right, steaming, stir-frying, or just fresh in a salad. Got it. So those heirloom varieties we talked about, what makes them so special?
Well, heirloom varieties are like treasures from the past. They've been passed down through generations of farmers who valued them for their special flavors and textures, and sometimes even for their colors. And because they haven't been through the same kind of intense breeding programs as modern hybrids, they often have more genetic diversity, which can mean more nutrients and better resistance to diseases.
So they're like the originals, the OG superstars of Chinese cabbage. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. So I know we talked a bit about cooking methods earlier, but I'd love to hear more specifics. Give me some ideas.
Let's get cooking. Chinese cabbage is so versatile. For raw preparations, think beyond just salads. You can use it to make delicious spring rolls, a crunchy slaw for tacos, or even as wraps.
Cabbage wraps. That's a great idea. What about ways to cook it?
Oh, the possibilities are endless. You can stir-fry it, add it to soups and stews, even use it to make dumplings. Braising, steaming, roasting, grilling, it's all good.
Wow, you're making me hungry. What are some of your favorite Chinese cabbage recipes?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are so many. But I think a simple stir-fry with ginger, garlic, and soy sauce is a classic for a reason. It's quick, easy, and packed with flavor. I also love a good Chinese cabbage soup with tofu and shiitake mushrooms. Perfect for a cold night.
Those both sound delicious. And you mentioned spices that go well with it, too. What are some of your go-tos?
Well, besides the anti-bloating trio, which are caraway, fennel, and ginger, you can use all sorts of Asian-inspired spices. Cilantro, curry powder, chili flakes, garam masala. Those all work really well. You can even add a little sweetness with some honey or maple syrup.
Ooh, little sweetness. I like it.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned earlier that those cancer-fighting mustard oils are formed when you cut or chew the cabbage. So there's a certain way we should be preparing it to get the most out of those compounds.
You got it. Chopping or slicing the cabbage releases an enzyme called myrosinase, and that enzyme converts the glucosinolates into those beneficial mustard oils. But heat can actually deactivate that enzyme. So the best way to get the most out of those compounds is to either eat the cabbage raw or let it sit for a few minutes after you chop it before you cook it. That'll give the enzyme time to do its thing.
So a little bit of patience can really make a difference. It really is incredible how versatile and nutritious this vegetable is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts on Chinese cabbage? What's the one thing you want people to take away from all of this?
Well, I hope people realize that Chinese cabbage is so much more than just, a simple side dish. It's packed with history. It's incredibly versatile in the kitchen, and it's so good for you. It really is a hidden gem. And the best part is it's so easy to find, and it's affordable too. So I encourage everyone to try it out, experiment with different varieties and cooking methods, and, just see what you can do with it. Discover the joy of Chinese cabbage.
That's a great way to put it. I know I've learned so much today. I feel like a Chinese cabbage expert now. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion.
My pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire a whole new generation of Chinese cabbage fans.
I think you might be right. So to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Chinese cabbage. And if you want to learn even more, be sure to check out the sources you provided. Until next time, happy cooking and happy eating. And we're back for the final part of our Chinese cabbage adventure. It's amazing we've learned that even the seeds are edible.
It's true. You know, it's a plant with so many uses, and not just in the kitchen either.
Oh, really? Now I'm curious, what else can you use it for?
Well, in traditional Chinese medicine, it's been used for all sorts of things, like helping with digestion, relieving coughs. It can even be used in poultices and compresses for skin problems. And some people believe that it can help reduce cravings for alcohol.
Wait, what? Reduce alcohol cravings.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I don't think anyone knows for sure, but the thinking is that some of the compounds in Chinese cabbage might affect the neurotransmitters that, control cravings. It's definitely an area where more research is needed, but it's a fascinating idea, isn't it?
It is. So we have this ancient plant that's delicious, nutritious, and maybe it can even help with cravings. It's pretty amazing.
I know, right? It really is one of nature's gifts.
Speaking of nature, we talked about health in cooking, but what about the environment? Is Chinese cabbage a sustainable crop to grow?
That's a great question. And the good news is, yeah, it is pretty sustainable. It grows quickly, so it doesn't need as much land or resources as some other vegetables. And it's also pretty resistant to pests, which means farmers don't need to use as many pesticides.
That's good to hear. So choosing Chinese cabbage is a win-win for our health and for the planet. Now, I keep thinking about those outer leaves you were talking about, the ones that are so nutrient-rich. Do you have any, tips for how to use them? I have to admit, I usually just throw them in the compost.
No, don't compost those leaves. They're too good for that. You can chop them up and add them to stir fries, soups, even smoothies, for an extra boost in nutrition. Or you can saute them with a little garlic and olive oil. That's delicious. And if you're feeling adventurous, you could even try fermenting them and making your own kimchi.
You know what? You've convinced me. Those outer leaves are going to get a second life in my kitchen from now on. So before we wrap up this whole deep dive, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners? What's the one thing you really hope they take away from all this?
Well, more than anything, I hope people will start to see Chinese cabbage in a new light. It's so often overlooked, but it's so versatile and so good for you. It really deserves to be a star ingredient. So my advice is go out and try it. Experiment with different varieties, different cooking methods, different flavors. Just have fun with it and see what you discover.
I love that. Discover the joy of Chinese cabbage. I feel like I've learned so much today.
I'm a Chinese cabbage convert, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Really. It's been great talking with you. And who knows, maybe we've inspired a whole new generation of Chinese cabbage lovers out there.
I think you might be right about that. So, to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the amazing world of Chinese cabbage. And if you want to learn even more, you can always check out the sources that you provided. Until next time, happy cooking and happy eating.